Hello everybody. This is going to be our first attempt at doing a video. We may be using this more in the weeks to come. I guess it just kind of depends on how the pandemic goes as we move forward. But we're all locked in and holed up at our homes, I hope. But I wanted to give you some information about what's going on and talk to you about our passage for the day, etc. I wanted to first start off and just say, basically all of our meetings are canceled at this moment. There won't be any VTN and no youth group and anything else that we had planned. I think we already canceled the rummage sale coming up. At least it's postponed till a future time. So we'll look at that as we go forward. The thing that's really been on my mind a lot as we face this, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like we're getting to experience the world like mankind has experienced it throughout history. A lot of pandemics, a lot of plagues, a lot of sickness, no way to fight it except stay away from one another, hold yourself up. Some of you probably already know this, but in the early church, the Christians were the ones that would take care of people when they were sick. When the plague came, all of the people with any money and all the rulers of the Roman cities, etc., would flee to the mountains and get out of town until the plague passed. And those early Christians in the very first century or two would really take care of the sick and take care of one another. And it made a difference. Obviously, a lot of them got sick and died, and they considered not their own lives more than taking care of others. They remembered Jesus' words that, when I was sick, you came to me, etc. And so they did it and took care of them. And the people that recovered, obviously, were, they became Christians in droves. And it was one of the early events that caused the church to just explode, was how the Christians took care of people even when they were ill. Well, we're in a different time now. Not that our call is any different, but it's probably not the best thing for us to try to take care of the sick, because we have health care systems and things in place that can do so much better job. So it's not like that's what we're called to, I don't think. But I do think there are some things that we should do. And during this time, I'd like for all of us to be thinking, what would make us stand out? In other words, what would make Jesus be glorified so that people noticed, hey, those Christians, they're different than others. And so I've been thinking about what we could do and how could we respond and help others in need. I heard about something that happened in Italy. A lot of the elderly people in Italy were quarantining themselves, and they were in their apartments or in their homes, and they couldn't get out to get stuff, And the fact that young, healthy adults were less likely to be harmed by this COVID-19, a lot of them started helping the elderly and getting goods to them and food and other things they needed. So I've created a little form, and it's in the email. It's a little volunteer form. If any of you who are young adults and would like to be put on a list, or rather, if you would like to be paired up with someone who's elderly and they can't get out of their home, and you would like to, I think what we'd like to see, I'd like to see someone reaching out to them, just checking on them. How are you doing? What do you need? And then maybe drop some stuff by their home just to help them out. And so if you're interested in doing that and being a part of that volunteer system, the link to the form is in the email, which also will contain the link to this video. So I think that's about all I had to say about announcements and things like that. Our passage this week that I was going to be talking about is Isaiah chapter 3 and chapter 4. Isaiah 3 is a bit longer and chapter 4 is really short. It's really interesting. I'd like to read the whole thing, and I guess that's good. A good thing about doing this in video form. So if you don't want to listen to the whole thing, and you can just skip ahead. Good. There you go. You can go back and forth and call me on anything I've said or done. But I'd like to read to you this passage first. This is the word of God. For behold, the Lord God of hosts is taking away from Jerusalem and from Judah support and supply, all support of bread and all support of water, the mighty man and the soldier, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder, the captain of 50 and the man of rank, the counselor and the skillful magician and the expert in charms. And I will make boys their princes, and infants shall rule over them. And the people will oppress one another, every one his fellow, and every one his neighbor. The youth will be insolent to the elder, and the despised to the honorable. For a man will take hold of his brother in the house of his father, saying, You have a cloak, you shall be our leader, and this heap of ruins shall be under your rule. And that day he will speak out, saying, I will not be a healer. In my house there is neither bread nor cloak. You shall not make me leader of the people. For Jerusalem has stumbled, Judah has fallen, because their speech and their deeds are against the Lord, defying his glorious presence. For the look on their faces bears witness against them. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them, for they have brought evil on themselves. Tell the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for what his hands have dealt out shall be done to him. My people, infants are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, your guides mislead you, and they have swallowed up the course of your paths. The Lord has taken his place to contend. He stands to judge peoples. The Lord will enter into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the face of the poor, declares the Lord God of hosts. The Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks, glancing wantonly with their eyes, mincing along as they go, tinkling with their feet, therefore the Lord will strike with a scab the heads of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will lay bare their secret parts. In that day the Lord will take away the finery of the anklets, the headbands, the crescents, the pendants, the bracelets and the scarves, the headdresses, the armlets, the sashes and perfume boxes, and the amulets, the signet rings and nose rings, the festal robes, the mantles, the cloaks, the handbags, the mirrors, the linen garments, the turbans and the veils. Instead of perfume, there will be rottenness. Instead of a belt, a rope. And instead of well-set hair, baldness. And instead of a rich robe, a skirt of sackcloth. And branding instead of beauty. Your men shall fall by the sword, and your mighty men in battle. And her gates shall lament and mourn. Empty, she shall sit on the ground. And 7 women will take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach. And now suddenly we have a complete turnaround. It says, in that day the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, And the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. And he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, everyone who has been recorded for life in Jerusalem, when the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the bloodstains of Jerusalem from its midst by a spirit of judgment and by a spirit of burning. And then the Lord will create over the whole site of Mount Zion and over her assemblies a cloud by day and smoke and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be a canopy. There will be a booth for shade by day from the heat, and for a refuge and a shelter from the storm and rain. So what's happening in this passage is, I think, is pretty fascinating, because the whole big long section of judgment is basically saying something like this. Don't put your dependence on human leadership, or don't put your dependence on beauty, fame, talent. And the reason I think it's fascinating is because we still do the same thing today. We put a lot of confidence in men and women who are really good at leading and are charismatic and are strong and powerful and, leaders. And I know in our culture we probably scorn and mock leaders a lot too, but there's a sense that we're saying we really admire people for what they do, to the extent that we're not, I guess, leaning on God and depending on Him to really be our source, and we look to humans too much. I thought about starting off the message, if you guys have been here on Sunday morning, and asking who your heroes were. Who do you admire? Who do you look up to? Which is fine to look up and admire people, but it can also be an indication of where we've gone amiss. The first part, again, is about, God's basically saying, I'm going to take away the people that you're depending on. I'm going to take away not only the people, but the support, the supply, your support of bread, your support of water, everything that you're depending on. I'm going to remove it from you and leave you feeling empty. Now, that's the first part. And then in the second part, he starts talking about the women, and he's talking about their beauty. And I just can't help but think of actresses in Hollywood and stars and singers and beautiful people that we look up to and we admire, and we watch their videos and their memes, and we do that like crazy. And I think what God is saying is that inasmuch as we're depending on and looking to others and not Him, then what He's going to do is He's going to remove that. He's going to pull it out. And, God does that. I remember when I was in high school, I was dating a girl. And I dated her for a year or two. And during the time I was dating her, and she was a good girl. She was she was good, but she was my everything in a lot of ways. She was everything I was living for. And I felt like as a young man, what happened was we broke up, and it was kind of a mutual thing. She was a little older than I was, and she already went to college, and I was still back in high school, and so we broke up. And then I found the Lord during the summer between my junior and senior year in high school. That's when I really started walking with Jesus. And I looked at that and I thought, as a young man, I wouldn't have given my life to Christ so easily had I still been dating this girl. And that was my interpretation of it at the time. I really felt like the Lord took her out of my life in order to open up the door for me to be open to the gospel. And I really believed that, and kind of still do. It's just, I think a lot nowadays about how we interpret events in our life. And of course, here we are in a season where a lot is being taken away from us. Things that we really depend on and things that we think we really need. And those things are, they're being removed. And so I don't know how much you want to interpret that as, okay, this is God taking it away from us, or wait a minute, Kyle, are you telling me that God caused this plague? Did he cause this COVID-19? And what I do know that scriptures teach is that not even a sparrow falls to the ground without the Lord knowing and without it being his will. And so at some level, yeah, of course, he at least is allowing it. There's an interesting dynamic that goes on when you read the Old Testament. You read through these stories, and often you have a prophet that's coming to Israel prophesying that if they don't turn, that God's going to judge. Now, the form of that judgment was often, I'm going to send an army to you, some wicked country, some wicked nation that doesn't follow God, and they're going to come and overtake you. And here's what's ironic. The judgment would happen. This army would come in and attack the country of Israel, and they all understood this was God's judgment. And oftentimes they would repent and turn back to God. And then God would turn and judge this nation that he sent against Israel. And then he would judge them for what he caused them to do. It's fascinating. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, my kind of take on this is that this sickness, I don't know if it's directly a judgment of God, but what if it's Satan? What if it's the enemy trying to destroy us and bringing this on the earth? Yet at some level, it's still God who's aware of it, and he's the one that we should cry out to stop it and to help us see what message he's trying to get across to us. That's always a good response when things get taken away from us and tragedy happens, is that we want to open our eyes and say, God, what are you trying to say to us? And regardless of whether it just happened or whether it's directly at the hand of God, whatever it is, we want to turn to God and say, what are you trying to say? Well, it's what he did in Isaiah chapter 3, is he took all these things away. He took comfort away from Israel, and he took beauty away from the women, and he took their beauty, their fame, their glory, everything that made them glorious. He removed it. And so you get to chapter 4, and it's the redemption section. There's a lot of this in the Old Testament, this theme of judgment, then redemption, judgment, then redemption. And it's good to always remember that whenever God does bring judgment, that's never his final plan for us. It's always, now how do I redeem you? How am I going to call you back? How am I going to help you obey the law? How am I going to help you follow me and walk with me? And it ends up being a good thing. When he takes things away from us, it ends up being good. Just like me losing my girlfriend, if you will, that was removed so that I could find the Lord. And so you get to chapter 4, and it starts to talk about the redemption. And in the redemption, he says, in that day, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious. And that's probably talking about the Messiah. The branch of the Lord is Jesus, probably. Or it could be the shoot, the little shoot that comes up through the ground. That's the word. So the branch of the Lord is going to be beautiful and glorious. And then the fruit of the land shall be the pride and the honor of the survivors of Israel. There you go, the survivors of Israel. So judgment came on Israel, but and it was because of the wicked, right? In the middle of it, he actually said, in verse 10, he said, "Tell the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds." But see, they still had to go through it. That's what's interesting, is that even the righteous in the land had to go through the judgment that was brought on the land because of the unrighteous, because of the wicked. And so they were going through it. And in chapter 4, when he says that the fruit of the land shall be the pride and the honor of the survivors of Israel, that's the righteous. They're the ones who survived the judgment. And he said that it's going to go well with them. And so it reminded me, when I was talking about branch and fruit, it reminded me of John chapter 15, I think verses 4 and 5, where it says, "Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." So this Isaiah passage is talking about branches and fruits, and the Messiah is tied in with the branch. And I know that in John he says that we're the branch and he's the vine. Still, the point is that as we're in him, we'll bear fruit. And so he starts talking about what's going to happen in that day when redemption happens. You'd think that he would say, okay, all the stuff that I took away from you, I'm going to give it back. I'm going to return all of this stuff. And he does it. Instead, he starts talking about how everything's going to be made new. You're going to get a new life. You're going to get new protection. And you're going to, all the harm that was done to you is going to be restored. He's going to create over the whole side of Mount Zion and over our assemblies, there's going to be a cloud by day and smoke and shining of a flaming fire by night. Now, you'll recognize that because when the children of Israel came out of Egypt way earlier in the historical story, as they were going through the wilderness, same deal. There was a cloud by day, so they're out in there, the heat of the sun in a desert, and there's this cloud that's protecting them. And then at night, and if you've ever been in a desert, you know that oftentimes you're burning up during the day and then it just freezes at night because all the sun goes away and there's just nothing but open. The air just gets cold. And so they would have smoke and a pillar of fire. And that's what he promises here, smoke and the shining of a flaming fire by night. And it wouldn't have gotten past the recipients of this prophecy that he was referring back to the same kind of protection that he gave their ancestors many, many years before. So the message of that is that nothing can harm you. Nothing can harm you. I'm going to protect you like that. And that's what our eternity will be like with him. There will be a booth for shade by day from the heat, and for a refuge and a shelter from the storm and rain. And so God's promising that through the branch, through the Messiah, he's going to protect us. And it also reminded me of Matthew 10:28. Here's what Jesus said. "Don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They cannot touch your soul. Fear only God, who can destroy both soul and body in hell." And the message is, even if in this life you can be hurt, God's giving us a promise of ultimate protection that we cannot be harmed. Even if we are harmed physically here, he's got us. And as believers, that's what we hold on to. As believers, that's what we cling to. And so here we are facing a big crisis in our world, and people are going to die from this virus. And it would be the wrong message for me to say to you guys, don't be, you're going to be okay. I don't know if you're going to be okay. But what I can say is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I want you to stay away from other people to keep this virus from spreading. Not because you're afraid. I want you to do it because you love one another, and you love other people, and so you want them to be protected. The more vulnerable, the more higher risk, the elderly, the people who have compromised immune systems. I want you to obey the authorities and not be reckless because you love them. Not because you're afraid. Because, well, in my mind, this gets us back into contact with this message of the gospel, is that we don't need to fear for our lives. You've heard me say that the command that's given more than any other command in the scriptures is do not be afraid. And the only way we can not be afraid in the midst of a storm, in the midst of persecution, in the midst of a deadly virus, is if we know He's got us. If we know that He's protecting us. I think we can count on Him to protect us in this life, and we lean into Him and expect that, but that's not our ultimate promise. The ultimate promise is that He's got us. He's got us. So, reading from one of my commentaries, thus the author is saying that there is nothing in the created universe which can harm those who belong to God. Some have felt this mention of the sun and the rain to be somewhat mundane, and thus to offer a rather weak conclusion to the segment. However, when it's remembered that in a pagan worldview, the natural forces are deities to be feared, this assertion gains considerable strength. Those who abide in the shadow of the Almighty have nothing to fear from the principalities and powers of this world. Don't be afraid. God will take things away from us, and when He does, it's for our good. He's got our good at His heart. He's got our good in mind. And that's good news to share. And so let's be thinking during this season of how we can see Him be glorified, how we can act and be and serve and give in a way that's not stupid, but it's also caring. One of my buddies has a little slogan during this time: "Don't be afraid, but don't be stupid." I think that's a good word for all of us. All right. Thanks for listening. Thanks for fast forwarding to the end. It was fun.